Stop the funeral! She's not dead!" The words cut through the silence like a knife. A ragged homeless man, dirt on his hands and fear in his eyes, stood before the polished coffin of a billionaire's daughter. The crowd gasped. Security laughed him off, brushing him aside like trash. To them, he was nothing. But what they didn't know was that in less than 10 minutes, the world would find out just how wrong they were. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone knew your truth? Tell us in comments. Before we begin, hit subscribe. It's appreciated. It was supposed to be the kind of day where the world stopped to honor power and legacy. A billionaire's funeral, held beneath towering marble pillars, filled with the wealthy, the polished, and the proud. Black cars lined the street, their tinted windows hiding faces that had long forgotten struggle. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, and the air was heavy with grief that seemed rehearsed more than real. Among the sea of black suits and dark veils, one man stood out, not because anyone wanted him there, but because he didn't belong. His clothes were torn, his beard unshaven, his shoes barely holding together. He was the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid, the kind of man nobody looked in the eye. To most, he was invisible, a shadow, a reminder of a life they never wanted to imagine. His name was David. Once he had a job, a family, a future. But life had stripped him down piece by piece until all he had left was his instinct, his heart, and a truth no one was ready to hear. He had wandered into the service not to beg for change, not to find food, but because something inside him screamed that he had to. Something was wrong. The coffin, polished and heavy, carried down the aisle, was said to hold the body of a young woman, the billionaire's only daughter. People whispered about tragedy, about loss, about the cruelty of fate. Yet David's eyes never left the box. His chest tightened with every step closer to the grave. To him, it wasn't just a coffin, it was a prison. The crowd didn't notice him watching. They didn't care. To them, he was just a homeless man stumbling into a world that would never accept him. But what would you do if you saw something nobody else dared to believe? Would you stay silent or risk everything to speak? David stood at the edge of the crowd, his chest rising and falling with unease. The air felt colder, heavier, and every instinct in him screamed that something was terribly wrong. The mourners wept, some out of guilt, some out of duty, but none with the raw fear David felt in his bones. His eyes stayed locked on the coffin. He remembered her face. Weeks earlier, before the headlines, before the tragic announcement, he had seen her. Not as a billionaire's daughter, not as some untouchable figure, but as a young woman who had stopped to hand him food when no one else dared. Her kindness had burned into him like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. And now, seeing that coffin, he refused to believe she was gone. The whispers of disbelief grew louder when David edged closer. People moved aside with disgust, clutching their pearls and wrinkling their noses as if he carried a disease. One man hissed for security. Another muttered how disrespectful it was to allow someone like him at such a prestigious service. Every glance sliced into David like a blade, but he kept moving. His gut told him he couldn't turn back. The first warning came swift and sharp. A guard blocked his path, shoving him back with a hard hand to the chest. The crowd murmured with satisfaction, relieved to see him put in his place. But as the coffin rested at the front of the hall, David swore he saw movement, just the faintest shift, fingers pressing against silk lining. He blinked, heart hammering. Had he imagined it? He shouted, his voice hoarse, breaking through the rehearsed mourning, "She's alive!" Gasps erupted. Some sneered, some laughed. An older man whispered that the homeless lose their minds. A woman muttered that grief makes people imagine things. The billionaire's associates rolled their eyes, dismissing David like a nuisance. But he didn't back down. He pushed forward again, his body trembling with urgency. Two guards grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. The crowd leaned in, eager for the spectacle, the humiliation of a man who dared to interrupt wealth and power. Cameras flashed. To them, he was just another scandal, a disturbance to be silenced. Yet David's eyes never left the coffin. He swore he saw it again, a twitch, a shudder, something no one else would admit. The guards dragged him across the marble floor, his knees scraping against the cold stone. The jeers grew louder, the judgment heavier, but deep inside, he knew. He wasn't wrong. The question burned in his mind, and maybe in yours. If you were in his place, with the world laughing at you and security dragging you away, would you still fight to prove the truth? Because what happened next would silence every single doubt in that room. The moment felt like it stretched into forever. David, pinned to the ground by two guards, stared at the coffin with wild, desperate eyes. His voice cracked as he screamed again, "She's alive!" The words echoed off the marble walls, swallowed by the gasps and laughter of those who refused to believe. And then, it happened. A sound, faint at first, like a muffled thud from within. The guards froze. The crowd stilled. David's body shook with adrenaline as he yelled for them to listen. Another thud, louder this time, and then a scraping sound. The coffin trembled. People leapt to their feet, some shrieking, others stumbling back in disbelief. A woman fainted. The billionaire's closest advisors exchanged horrified glances, their masks of composure finally cracking. Cameras rolled as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The lid shifted. Slowly, agonizingly, the polished wood began to move. A pale hand pressed against the inside, fingers trembling as they pushed upward. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed in terror, others rushed forward, desperate to see if it could be true. David, still restrained, shouted with every ounce of strength left in him, "Open it! Now!" The guards, panicked and unsure, finally dropped him and scrambled to the casket. Together with trembling hands, they lifted the lid. Inside, the billionaire's daughter lay wide-eyed, gasping for air, her body weak but alive. She coughed, her chest heaving, clawing at the world she nearly lost. The silence shattered into pandemonium. Reporters surged forward. Guests wept and stumbled backward in disbelief. And David, broken, bruised, but victorious, stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. The girl wasn't dead. She had been buried alive. Now the question is, what happens when the powerful are forced to face the truth they tried to bury? Drop your thoughts below. What do you think comes next? The chaos outside the grand hall spread like wildfire. News outlets that had come to cover a billionaire's funeral were suddenly broadcasting the impossible. His daughter was alive. Alive because a homeless man no one valued had refused to stay silent. Cameras turned from the grieving elite to David, his torn clothes and dirt-stained face now the symbol of truth that shattered lies. The guests who had laughed at him minutes earlier couldn't meet his eyes. Those who dismissed him now stood pale with shame. The very same guards who dragged him across the marble floor stood frozen, realizing they had nearly silenced the only voice that dared to speak the truth. The young woman, still trembling from her coffin, looked at David with eyes full of gratitude. Weak but alive, she mouthed two words he would never forget: "Thank you." And yet, as the world gasped at the miracle, the deeper injustice lingered. Why did it take a man society discarded to save the daughter of the wealthy? Why did no one listen until the proof broke free from the coffin itself? It wasn't just about life and death. It was about how easily people judge, dismiss, and erase others based on appearance, on status, on race, on power. David walked away from that hall not as a beggar, not as an outcast, but as the man who proved the world wrong. Still homeless, still struggling, but no longer invisible. He had reminded everyone that truth does not come dressed in wealth or power. Sometimes it comes in the voice of the one you least expect. So ask yourself, How many times have voices been silenced simply because no one believed they mattered? And how many more will it take before we finally learn to listen? Show some love with a like and subscribe to stay inspired.